I get a lot of these questions on my channel that essentially amount to, should I roll for X, Y, or Z servant? I'm really flattered that people would value my opinion on this game enough to ask for my input on something like that. Unfortunately, it's not a question that I can give a very good answer to. It depends on so many factors that are unique to you outside of my knowledge and control that I just can't say very much about the topic that is conclusive or particularly helpful for somebody who's asking. So in this video, I'm going to go over some of the things that I consider before I roll a servant and kind of try to equip you with those sorts of tools that will allow you to make your own informed and well-reasoned decisions about who you should and shouldn't be rolling for. One of the big points that I want to make is, I think when people are asking this, a lot of the time what they're really asking is exservant really strong? The answer to that is pretty much always yes in the current era of this game. You know, is this servant able to clear content and perform effectively to a degree during challenging encounters with enemies? That kind of thing. It's a reasonable thing to ask. There's very few servants from now on who are new releases who are not pretty good. Everybody's at least pretty strong. There are, of course, a handful of exceptions to that. There's a couple of underwhelming servants here and there, but for the most part, from now on, everybody that will be released in the future is at least pretty strong. So that's not something that you need to be too worried about, because whoever you're picking up, they're probably at least good. And as an addendum to that point, the developers in the Japanese version of the game have gotten, I would say, a lot better or a lot more generous at giving out rank up quests and upgrades and just generally buffs to servants. So even if you pick up somebody who is a little bit underwhelming right on release, there's a good chance that they'll be buffed before too long and brought up to a pretty good level. So, for example, there's a servant upcoming named Mao Nobu, who on release is gonna be a little bit weak relative to the other members of her class and her rarity. That said, she'll get buffed before too long, and she'll be brought up to a pretty reasonable and usable level. So if you want to roll for her, don't let that be something that concerns you, because the developers really have gotten quite good about releasing buffs and upgrades quite regularly. And as our global version of the game continues to progress, we'll get those too. So that'll be okay. In my estimation, the most important thing to keep in mind when considering what servants one should roll for is what kinds of teams can you build with that servant. In other words, what do you already have and what are you planning to get in the future? Jalter is a buster crit servant. Do you have the other support servants and craft essences that you need to make a buster crit servant function really well? If the answer is no, probably don't roll for Jalter. If it's a quick servant and you don't have your own scatty and you're never planning on getting your own scatty, you probably shouldn't be thinking too hard about rolling for that quick servant, etc., etc. So just consider, what do I already have? What am I planning to get in the future, / what will I need to get in the future before this servant becomes really, really viable? Because this is a team-based game. Unless you're going out of your way to solo content, no servant fights alone. So always keep in mind the kinds of teams that you want to or are capable of building around a potential servant that you might roll for. And for a lot of people, you'll want to keep this part in mind, which is, what is your St. Court's income like? If you're a totally free-to-play player, you should be really conservative about rolling. Unlike other gacha games, or at least some others, there is no pity system in this one to guarantee a servant after a certain number of rolls. Alternatively, if you're somebody who buys the guaranteed SSRs a couple times every year when we get those, or if you're somebody who buys packs once a month, or if you're somebody who buys quartz all the time, these are going to change the answer and lower the bar for what kind of servants you want to roll for. Because if you can just buy more quartz whenever you want to, then of course you can just roll whenever and for whomever your heart desires. But if you're somebody who is just relying purely on passive, free St. Court's income, then you want to be much more careful about who you're rolling for, and you might want to put more consideration into, support servants or really meta servants like Merlin and Scatty and Castoria when she comes out, versus somebody who is a little bit more free with their money, shall we say, can splurge on servants like... You get the picture. As kind of a final point, I'll bring this up. I've never mentioned this with the intention of killing anybody's enthusiasm in a servant, that's happened a fair few times. So this is really something that I think you should consider, especially if you have just started recently or for whatever reason aren't caught up with the story, which is that newer servants will often have ascension materials and skill up materials that are gated to the later story chapters. So for example, these guys are not something that you can easily obtain if you're still in part 1. So if a servant needs these rings and you aren't able to go and farm them, then that servant is going to be stuck at a low level of enhancement until you can get there. So this is something that I think you should probably get in the habit of looking up beforehand, which is what items does a servant need and what is the earliest that you can get those items, and then kind of, let that factor into your decision. It doesn't have to be a deal breaker necessarily, unless it is for you, but just understand that sometimes you're going to get a servant and you won't be able to level them up fully until you hit Agartha or something. So just be aware of that, understand that that's going to happen, and do your research beforehand so that you don't get trapped in that situation without knowing. And that's kind of the big takeaway of this video as a whole, isn't it? As players on the global version of this game, we have foreknowledge of what the next 2 years worth of content is going to be. So take advantage of that. We know what servants are going to come out, when they're going to come out, what their skills and noble phantasms will do. We know what kind of ascension materials they'll need. So do your research, be informed, and then from there you'll be able to make these decisions about should you or should you not roll for whatever servant on your own, and you'll be able to feel good about the decisions you come to. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you're new, I'm going to have my follow code in the game, in the description below, so you can give me a follow. If you're a newer player and having trouble attracting friends or that kind of thing, using my follow code will let you use my support list, which is on screen right now, during Part 1 story quests. So if that looks interesting to you, give that a follow. I'm also going to have my Discord username there, so you can shoot me a message in a private manner if you want to discuss things over there. And of course, if not, you can always just comment down below. I love to see questions, clarification questions, off topic, but still related to FGO, so I guess on topic questions, suggestions for videos, all of that kind of stuff I love to see in the comments. So please do, if you need to get a hold of me, it's fairly easy to do, so feel free, and I'm always happy to help. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.